You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com.
Well, Chris is still on vacation, so your old pal Ed is here with James Fox from FutureSox to try and work our way through as the White Sox continue to do White Sox things, like have top prospects like Chase Mydroth come up and then hurt themselves doing drills, and have Martin Perez, your primary trade candidate at the deadline, go on the 60-day IL, and now ESPN's reporting that he's gone for the season, even though he's not going to require surgery. Thank goodness for that, because as a White Sox fan, I was looking forward to him pitching for somebody else next year anyway. And welcome to the team, Bobby Dahlbeck. And beyond that, it's just more White Sox stuff. They make it interesting against the Twins on a Tuesday night, and they get Byron Buxton making an incredible play in the ninth inning on Andrew Benintendi, what looked like a gapper. And so, James, you mentioned it before we started talking here. Maybe we should just switch to Bears draft picks and let this team soak in its own juices for a while.
Yeah, I wanted to do Bears and see if Chris noticed. So, yeah.
He's on the island, so he isn't going to notice much of anything.
He's not going to listen. I don't even know if he'll listen back at this point. But, yeah, no, I mean, look, I think we kind of knew that it was going to be bad, obviously. I didn't really care that much about the record. What is it, 5-8? They're 5-18 now. I do think the brand of baseball is a little bit better, but this isn't really fun for anybody, obviously.
No, I mean, going out there and watching, Nick Maton get at-bats when he's hitting 167, there's a lot of guys. Luis Robert Jr. still does not look like he's into the game. Andrew Vaughn continues to struggle. At least we're starting to see in a lineup. Now, granted, some guys have very, very small sample sizes like Edgar Caro and Bobby Dahlbeck, but it's nice to see some 200s and 300s in the lineup instead of everybody just hitting one something for the year. But again, a lot of this is about taking care of the positives, right? So we see Edgar Caro come up, and now he's hitting 368 with an 874 OPS as you and I are recording. Put the ball in play in a situation against the Red Sox to get a run home. It has looked pretty good. I mean, I saw him lose a bad backhand on a pitch that cost him, and then plunks a guy in the back trying to throw it on to first. So maybe the defense is a little rougher than anybody would want, but at least offensively, I think he's proving that he belongs. And like you and I have even talked about, and Chris and I have talked about plenty, it's a nice problem to have if your biggest problem is what do we do with three catchers on our major league roster that are really good, with Kyle Teal still waiting in the wings.
Yeah, no, I mean, Caro's been pretty impressive. I mean, obviously the league will adjust to him. He's going to have to adjust back. But I mean, look, there's no reason not to give him like the majority of time, right? I mean, I think Corey Lee is kind of still important because he's, youngish and he's going to be here. And Matt Dice, decent veteran that they'll probably move, I would imagine, at some point. But yeah, I mean, there are some positives. There's just not enough of them, obviously. I mean, if you get to watch Caro and Mydroth every day here in the early going, and I think Brooks Baldwin, in theory, could be on your next good team if that ever happens again, right? And, guys like Colson Montgomery and others, I think we're going to see, like, at their first hot streak. And just, so that, inherently, I think, is more interesting than last year was, when it's the Nicky Lopez show and all these guys who really don't matter, but also don't have any trade value, right? So, like, if you're going to be bad, like, be bad with kids who might matter here at some point. So at least I guess that's one, like, silver lining to this.
Well, and one of the things, so you mentioned that, and so the veteran in your rotation goes down, Martin Perez. And not that Davis Martin doesn't count as a veteran, but they bring up Jared Schuster, who'd only pitched out of the pen in Charlotte, and had been pitching very well. But it looks like first announcement was that Bryce Wilson will work out of a bulk relief role on Wednesday. So as this show is out, and you have somebody in Mike Vassell who's already kind of stretched out. He goes 3 innings on Tuesday night in relief of Davis Martin. So is it a competition, do you think, out of sort of the long relief core then to come up and take Perez's place, or what's in the minors that eventually takes over for him?
So I think I talked about it in the last show that they claimed like Owen White off of waivers. He was a former second round high school pick of Texas. He's been okay. He pitched yesterday, got roughed up a little bit, I think, in Charlotte. Nick Nastrini was good tonight, so he's not an option, but he could be, I guess, on your next turn in theory. Um, Justin Dunn is pitching out of the rotation, and he's been. I think one of the big issues is Jairo Iriarte has looked terrible, and his stuff has kind of backed up a little bit. So, like, he's on the 40 man. So Iriarte, White, and Nastrini, I think, are the next three guys on the 40 man. So I guess logic would suggest that maybe it's one of those guys. I do think something that's interesting, like a guy that's pretty close to the majors, Tyler Schweitzer, is a fifth round pick out of Ball State a few years back. He's just been solid forever in the minors, like for a couple of years now. He's a back end lefty. Like, if he makes it, he's a fifth starter. But he was piggybacking Grant Taylor in Birmingham, and now he's in Charlotte, like getting starts in Charlotte. And I just think with, Kai Bush and Mason Adams and some of these other guys who are down who you thought were going to get legit shots this year, I think Tyler Schweitzer might be that guy. I mean, I don't think it's next week, right? I think he probably makes a few Charlotte starts. But if he's in their rotation by mid-season, that one is another one that I wouldn't be surprised by. And that's another recent fifth rounder. We kind of talked about that on the last show.
Yeah, and of course the names that everybody's going to be looking for are Schultz and Smith, and too early for them though, right?
Yeah, the law firm, Schultz and Smith. Yes.
Yeah,
I just think the big issue with that is like I think we see them this year, and it might be in relief roles because it's something that Brian Bannister likes to do. But you have to build their innings base like just before that, right? So if the plan is to get those guys up over 100 innings, like I think it is like 110 to 130, something like that. So if you get them to 100 and then they have 25 to play with in the big leagues or something, and you get a look at these guys, I think that's cool. You can't guarantee 100 innings in the big leagues, right? Because regardless of what we think, like we know these games don't really matter, but these are professionals who try to win every night, right? If these guys go out and you have a 2 inning start, you can't exactly like leave them out there to throw 5 innings. Where like in the minors you can do some of that stuff. So yeah, I do think we see those guys, but I think it's like really really early to see them.
well, and a lot easier to justify leaving them in for 5 innings or going 6 innings, going longer in a ball game as a starter when they're at a level of competition that maybe they're even dominating, versus running into a hot team in the majors where you also can't just leave them out there to die and drown and give up Tanner Huck like numbers, 15 runs or whatever the heck he gave up for the Red Sox before turning his ship completely around against, of course, the White Sox. You don't want to necessarily stunt their growth, but somebody like Schweitzer, like you said, he's been solid. He seems to be on the way up. He seems to be in that kind of, along with Nastrini, back to a next guy up kind of a situation. So do they just string it along and give? I mean, Bryce Wilson was brought in with the thought that he's a potential starter anyway. So do you just see what you have in him and see if you can turn him into the flip candidate at the deadline or even earlier, and then focus on the minors?
Yeah, I mean you do have plenty of relievers, so I guess my initial thought was that that they would just move Bryce Wilson into the rotation and do that because I actually think they planned on Bryce Wilson being in the rotation and Shane Smith being in the bullpen. And then Shane Smith was so good that it was like, okay, we have to start this guy type of thing. So it is kind of weird. Like they didn't say that they were going to start Bryce Wilson tomorrow, right? They said they're probably going to start a traditional opener, like a reliever, and then let Bryce Wilson take the bulk. So, I mean, I guess they could do similar, right? If you have Jared Schuster and Bryce Wilson on your team, like they could probably get you through a game every fifth day. I just think you might be more beneficial. Like, you give Nick Nastrini a couple starts and you give Owen White a couple starts and you just like see if you can maybe unearth something in a lost season. I think that's probably the best strategy. I'm just not, it does seem like this time through, they're just going to go with what they have and try to get through it like in a bullpen day. But if reporting from today has been accurate, we're not going to see Martin Perez again. They are going to have like a longer term decision here to make.
Yeah, and again, this isn't a situation where you're going to necessarily look to trade somebody and bring them back in and say, okay, now here's a guy that's a starter, because really looking at what the trade candidates are, Luis Robert Jr. again just still looks terrible. And you and I have identified Matt Thaiss as the most likely guy to be able to move, but he's probably not bringing in somebody that's major league ready because for most teams, he's going to be a backup catcher, a very useful one, probably not the starting guy on a good team, but a useful piece that brings back maybe a bullpen arm if it's somebody that's really close, or more likely a prospect that's got a little rough around the edges that they're going to have to develop.
Yeah, it's $1 million backup catcher. I mean, I do think he's useful for somebody, but yeah, I mean that's just you're just not going to get anything. And even like, in a best case scenario, right, you were going to trade Josh Rojas and Mike Talkman for, like a DSL prospect or something, right? I actually think their biggest trade chip, if they don't trade Davis Martin, might be Cam Booser. We kind of talked about it on the last show. We talked about it off air a little bit before we started. That's the type of guy who, if he continues to do what he's doing, throwing high 90s, and he has like any modicum of success, like in a high leverage relief role, you're gonna have contenders like wanting that guy because he's super cheap, and the Sox don't really need him. And while he has 5 years of control, he is like 33 years old. That I think that's like those are the types of moves I think that you're gonna see. But I think I mean we're April 22nd. Like we're still kind of like months away from even thinking about trading anybody. So, we got kind of a long way to go here.
Yeah, and if you're only months away from needing a change in your life, or if you've got relatives who are like Cam Boozer and getting up there in years, check out Hyatt Home Medical Equipment for all of your needs to try and get yourself back to independent living. They can help you out with all sorts of things and all sorts of items to help people get around in their homes, manage their health in their homes, and anything that you can think of that you would need. Visit them at 3518 West 95th Street in Evergreen Park. Call them at 708-422-2300 or at hhme.com. Yeah, it's a little sad, right, that we spend so much time on these rebuild teams sitting here thinking about who's going to be jettisoned off the roster and who's going to be traded and what kind of a return you can get. I mean, at this point, a lot of what we're supposed to be looking for as White Sox fans are who's going to emerge and who's going to be a guy that becomes something, or, even in the case of like, I'll pick on Bobby Dahlbeck here. In the case of a Bobby Dahlbeck, a guy who was a top prospect for the Red Sox, came up, had some success and then fell apart. Is he a guy that, as a reclamation project, you can sit there and go, okay, well, we could use him in some capacity as we go forward? Because right now, you said it at the top, we're looking at Brooks Baldwin, we're looking at Edgar Caro. When Chase Mydroth comes back, and fortunately that sounds like that's not a very serious injury. But beyond that, I mean, Lenyn Sosa's had some success, but I know you're not a big fan. And we're waiting on guys in the minors that are a ways away, right? Because Colson Montgomery has got to show some signs of life before he gets up here. And the other Montgomery he's still in Kannapolis, right?
Yeah, he's an A-ball. And I will say, like, with Colson, like, he's been better over the last week. I think it's, he has like another couple weeks that look like this last week. They're just going to bring him up, and we don't have to rehash that again. But I do think they want to see him and see this next, perceived core. I mean, Bobby Dahlbeck had some success. It's just he's just like one of these super high strikeout guys with big power, right? So they do need big power. And the White Sox have an opportunity here, right? So like there's nothing stopping them from giving Bobby Dahlbeck 2 weeks to see if, he can be something. I do feel like these rebuilds that work, right? You like unearth somebody that you weren't expecting. So that would be nice at some point, right? All of a sudden, like somebody comes out of nowhere that's good. Because even like Chase Mydroth, I think third piece in a pretty huge trade, was a top 10 prospect in a really good system. I mean, that's a guy that should probably be pretty good. I don't really think he's under the radar. But yeah, I mean, finding somebody could be kind of important. I don't think Bobby Dahlbeck will be anything, but when you're the White Sox and you're 5-18, like there's no reason not to just kind of churn through and cycle through some guys to see if you can find something.
I think it's telling that he starts in place of Miguel Vargas, who doesn't get off the bench at all on a Tuesday night, and Vargas has been another guy that's just underwhelmed. But as Chris has continued, I'll beat the drum for Chris in his absence about how this is what Miguel Vargas really is, in spite of his minor league pedigree and in spite of his prospect pedigree, that with half a season at the Dodgers and now with quite a bit of time for the White Sox, he's a guy that just doesn't seem to have it at the major league level. So do you think there's a point at which some of the guys that we're expecting them to not give up on, I mean, isn't that the hope, though, that we would rather see if Bobby Dahlbeck continues to hit doubles and maybe puts them out of the ballpark, even if he strikes out a lot? But isn't it at this point, seeing if Dahlbeck can handle third base better defensively and can hit for more power? And I mean, you and I could put on blindfolds and tie one hand behind our back and pretty sure hit more than 139 after a couple of weeks. But, why not, right? I mean, why not start cycling guys through? We talked about Tim Elko already. Is there a plug to be pulled here on just about everybody or what?
I'm curious to see roster moves just because of like some of the 40-man implications, right? So like regardless of what we think of Miguel Vargas, like he was involved in a pretty significant trade for them. He's out of options though. So I'm like really curious to see like how long of a leash he kind of has. Like, look, if you're Chris Getz, I think the only thing worse than making a bad trade is like making the bad trade worse by like keeping the bad player for too long after you've already decided that he can't help you. And I do think Vargas is the type of guy where if you DFA'd him, somebody would probably claim him and give him a chance, right? And you'd hate for him to go somewhere else and have him be good, but it's like I don't know how long they can keep doing this when they could maybe look at other options. Lenyn Sosa is another one where I was a big fan of his in the minor leagues because he put up like monster numbers. But he just hasn't done it in the big leagues, and he's had enough at bats now. I can't really make any more excuses for him, and he's also out of options. So at some point, like this roster is going to crunch here because you're going to have veterans returning, and you're also going to have guys that you want to see. I mean, if you look down at Tim Elko right now, like, I don't think Tim Elko is a prospect either, but with what he's doing at Charlotte, there's just no reason for him to be on Charlotte for much longer. But as long as you keep running Andrew Vaughn out there at first, he doesn't really have a spot to play because you kind of want to rotate the DH. So yeah, I do think over the next 4 to 6 weeks here, what they do with the roster, I'm going to be pretty interested in. Not because guys are going to come up and they're going to all of a sudden like race to the top of the American League Central or anything, but I'm curious to see how like does Getz give up on guys that he acquired. He hasn't been married to guys so far, like like your Dominic Fletchers and some of these other guys. So I'm really curious to see how much rope Miguel Vargas has.
Yeah, and it's one of those too, or even on the pitching side of things. But you start looking at some of the numbers, and Tyler Gilbert's numbers are kind of Penn Murphy is still recovering, I think, from one really brutal outing, but he continues to be Will Venable's kind of go-to guy, I feel like. And Sean Burke, the ERA is starting to climb up there. It's not a pretty situation, even though it started the season really relatively strong. I mean, outside of Shane Smith and Davis Martin, who has been pretty good, I mean, it's hard to make a case that anybody's really emerging besides Cam Boozer out of that group. So does it start to churn there too? Like if Bryce Wilson, obviously, hopefully, and he's been okay, if he takes a role as a starter, I mean, are they going to start just cycling arms out of Charlotte and arms out of Birmingham to come up and see who can do it up here?
Possibly, because I think like Burke and all the guys you mentioned all do have minor league options. So that's not too tough of a decision. You don't have to DFA anybody, right? You could say, hey, we gave Sean Burke the opportunity. It hasn't been good enough. Now it's Nick Nestrini's turn because it just, it really doesn't matter all that much until some of the more important guys get here. And I do think while, we've seen struggles with Cannon and Berg, I think those guys are back end starters anyways. He started opening day because he might have the best stuff of the group other than Shane Smith, right? But it's not like if any of those dudes are on their next good team, it's going to be at the back of a rotation or potentially in a bullpen role anyway. So yeah, I don't think they're married to anybody. I think it's similar to Schultz and Smith, right, where they'd like to get these guys innings if they can, and they'd like them to be in the big leagues. But if it doesn't improve, it could be in Charlotte, and they can give somebody else a shot there. One interesting thing that I wanted to mention was Tristan McKenzie on the waiver wire. I'm curious to see there if the Sox have any interest there. I don't know what he's making, so they'd have to pick up the money, which, that's an issue for Jerry, obviously, is picking up any money. But I do think the White Sox are first on the waiver wire in season.
A guy like McKenzie who was good and then has been bad, and he's been really up and down his entire career, becomes a guy that you can sit there and go, and especially now that you have an opening in your rotation, you sit there and go, okay, well, we can give this guy a shot. But as you mentioned, some of the guys in the minors already, like Owen White and Justin Dunn, they've also gotten shots in the majors and haven't been able to take advantage. I think Dunn got hurt, which kind of cost him, but that's an interesting situation too, because the guys are going to get hit the waiver wire. There's going to be DFAs as the season goes on. What I'm watching for really out of the pitching staff is the same thing that we're talking about with the batters. I'm watching to see who carries forward. So like you said, Burke and Cannon might be back-end guys, but they still have to show, to me at least, they have to show that they're capable of doing it for something close to 30 starts before I'm going to give it to them. And the same thing with Shane Smith, who looks, fantastic at the start here, but he's got to prove it to me that this is real over almost 30 starts. But yeah, there's nothing that's emerged so far that makes me sit here and think, the way we thought about Garrett Crochet as a starter last year, that makes me sit here and think like, wow, we really found something. Other than, like I said, Shane Smith has looked good, but, I know the metrics on him still suggest that outside of his changeup, the rest of the stuff is okay. He doesn't dominate with any other pitches really. So if the league catches up to him, then you're sitting here looking at this going, well, what are we wrapping our arms around for the future? Whose jersey are we buying exactly?
Yeah, I don't think those guys are on the big league team. I mean, maybe like Edgar Caro has been pretty exciting, I think, so far, if you like catchers. I think Chase Mydroth will be some child's favorite player because of the way he plays, right? But I do think they just, those guys are in the minors. You got to really hope that, and obviously, like, the Colson Montgomery thing has been rough. You got Braden Montgomery coming, you got pitchers coming, you got, I think part of this was, I think they were trying to build a Robert trade into this whole thing with two more pieces coming back, and that's not looking great right now. And, they probably need two more drafts and two more international classes, and nobody wants to hear that. But I mean, it just takes time, especially when you don't spend any money. It's just, you could accelerate this process and spend a little bit. But we're just like a little bit a ways, from that too. I will say one other thing that seemed to be interesting. It looked like Cam Boozer was gonna get the opportunity to close potentially. So I'm wondering if I don't know how many save chances they're gonna have going forward, but I do think that's a pretty good use of their resources if they decide that he's their ninth inning guy.
Yeah, I'd be all for it. I mean, I don't know who else has really earned the right, and Boozer being a guy that, like you said, you're thinking is going to be eventually more along the lines of a trade as a 33-year-old, 34-year-old player than a guy that you're going to build around. He becomes an interesting guy because if he's getting save opportunities and he's converting, then he can certainly move back into an eighth inning role or another high leverage role for another team. But you hit on a point there too about how this isn't going to be accelerated because they refuse to spend money. And then you've got some angry Wirtzes out there that are looking at how, the network has gone down since the Blackhawks and Bulls have gone off the air, and it's pretty intolerable in terms of the ratings and the drop-off. And TV represents a huge revenue stream for most teams. And so if the White Sox, who are, I've talked about it with a number of people, you can get the rabbit ears going, you might have an antenna on your house, maybe you can get to it, but that digital channel 62 that his network is on is not the easiest channel in the world to get. I've tried with 4 TVs and I'm hitting 250, so I should be starting at DH. But without Comcast, that's still an issue, and I don't think anybody's buying the streams. because I don't know why you would want to pay to watch this.
Yeah, so I actually do. I have the app, and it's fine. But yeah, like the teams are terrible. I just I don't know what Wirtz thought. Like Wirtz got into business with Jerry Reinsdorf in 2025. Like what are you doing, and part of this whole thing, like I don't really understand the Comcast thing because first of all, like I cut the cord years ago. Like I don't understand paying for Comcast cable anymore when you can get other stuff for cheaper, first of all, right? But it is still like the largest provider in Chicagoland, and it seems like at this point if CHSN made a deal with Comcast, like I just feel like it would look bad on Comcast's end. So I don't know why they're like holding out as long as they are. Like the rumor is that Comcast would put them on the higher tier. Okay, great. So do that. And then people could get mad at Comcast, but at least, your channel would be on on their service and then you could go from there. It seems like they're just I don't really understand the whole thing. They're like holding out for a deal that nobody's ever going to get again, because these RSNs just don't make very much money for these companies.
No, and like you mentioned, the Wirtzes and the Reinsdorfs have been they've been in business together at the United Center,
playing footsie for a long time. Yes.
Yeah, I mean they've been co-tenants and the United Center, so there's been a lot of dealings between them, and it made sense that they were going to do a regional sports network like this. And I thought initially the issue was whether or not, and I don't really know where Marquee falls on the tiers, but I know they wanted to be in the same footing at least as Marquee. And I thought at one point I had read, and I might be making this up in some sort of fever dream or something like that, the tier that Reinsdorf and Wirtz would be put on is much different than what Tom Ricketts has got. So if that's the case, you're right. I mean, it makes Comcast look a little silly, and to have a bunch of White Sox fans mad at Comcast makes more sense than us all sitting here
being mad at them. Right.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't make any sense. I know. And so I think I think there was an extension to the agreement with Marquee. They are on like the basic or whatever. But like Marquee's going to the premium or whatever, like the second tier. Like they're going to that one too. All of these RSNs and the sports channels are all going to that, and you're going to end up paying an extra $20 a month, like on your Comcast bill. And if you just got the app to watch White Sox games only, it's $20. So, it is the same thing. Like I understand not paying the money directly to Jerry or something. Like I totally understand, people's reticence behind that. But yeah, I mean the whole thing has been not great. But the bigger issue is like you said, how much money they used to make on TV. They are not bringing in anywhere close to that type of revenue. So it's definitely going to affect like what they do going forward for sure.
Well, and it gets back to one of the basic things I think most White Sox fans have had a complaint about Jerry Reinsdorf over the past number of years in particular, right? Which is he expects us to show up when the team is bad so that our dollars will go towards making the team good, whereas most fandoms work the opposite way where we'll sit there and go, no, we're here, but we're not going to pour a whole lot of our time and money into a really, really poor, hard to watch, hard to get behind product. Put a good team on there, and we will show out in droves, which is what White Sox fans have historically done. When the team has been competitive, we fill that park, we watch it on TV, we listen to the radio, and I bet you in this new era, if the team was actually pretty good, or at least competitive enough to where, in the classic Jerry Reinsdorf sense, competitive enough where we're at least going to finish second in the division and make it interesting for a wild card, you'd probably have a lot more people sitting there going, well, I'm going to pop for the app. I'm going to see this. But, it's the economy, stupid. I mean, it's just we can't. Jerry, I think, launched this at the wrong time in terms of where the team was at. And if he had been smart about it, I think what he would have done was given Chris Getz some cash to go out and put on a competitive team. Get a couple of pieces for the rotation, build around some of the young guys. I mean, if you wanted Burke, Cannon, and then you find a Shane Smith, but not Martin Perez, give me a couple of other free agents, guys that are going to have some staying power and aren't reclamation projects. Fill the lineup with, and I know Brandon Drury got hurt, but give me like 5 Brandon Drurys and then 4 young guys, right? So that we know there's a base level of competence. And also invest in your training staff, because I'm kind of tired of the IL with all these guys. I mean, it's getting ridiculous.
Hurt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even like the Danny Wirtz thing, I mean, he can't play. I mean, the White Sox could almost blame them more than he can blame the White Sox. I mean, there was no runway for White Sox baseball, because
The Blackhawks are terrible.
They're both terrible, right? And maybe there's some hope with the Hawks because of how good the farm system is, and you have Bedard and this and that. But people weren't shelling out money to watch the team if it wasn't on perceived free television. And the Bulls, I mean, we could do a whole show on it. I mean, the Bulls are basically medieval times right now, is what I've been saying. It's dinner theater. It's, if you care about, winning titles or anything like that, it's not for you. You go fill the place and you have dinner and you cheer, and then you go home, and then the next game is, just the next game. It's it doesn't really matter. And that's what that kind of is. Baseball's just not like that. I mean, it's every day. And it's, when it's bad every day, it's just not very fun. So yeah, it's not a great time for the network. I will say, the broadcast isn't bad. I don't think John Schriffen is good, but I think adding Rick Fletcher and Connor and, some of the graphics are good, and the post game's obviously good. So that part of it's fine. It's just the team is just not good enough for it to matter.
Yeah, it just doesn't resonate the way other viewing options would, and really, again, how you spend your money. In the meantime, let's watch Edgar Caro and Chase Mydroth and Shane Smith and anybody else that starts showing up to these games, and hey, I'm ready to cheer for anybody in a White Sox uniform who shows some signs of life. So I will take that until the fall.
Yeah, I do think Tim Elko would be fun for fans. I just you have a big Andrew Vaughn problem. So I think it's fast. That's the part that fascinates me. It's just, like I said, over the next 4 to 6 weeks to see who they're willing to cut the cord on to get some other guys up here to just kind of churn this roster a little bit. I'm going to be curious to see what Chris Getz is willing to do.
Yeah, maybe that's what Comcast is holding out for. No Andrew Vaughn.
Yeah, they're waiting. Cut this guy and we'll put you on TV.
Yeah, exactly.
My God.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.